What really angers me about this is, having nursed and looked after people who died in their 20s of this, this is an entirely preventable disease. Condoms, we know, are the most effective way of preventing the spread of this fatal virus. And for everyone who becomes positive, will cost the state £250,000 in treatment. It's essential that we actually make sure people protect themselves. And I therefore find, you know, the Pope's comments, I'm very saddened by them.
I think it's absolute nonsense, this, but also I think the interesting thing is they're sort of putting people into two groups. You're either a motorist or you're a cyclist. And actually, many of us are both. I think most motorists, particularly in inner cities, you are aware of cyclists, but they literally appear from all sorts of places. There's a lot going on. There's some quite interesting studies about if you remove all the street furniture, so actually if you remove signs, remove traffic lights and so on, and look at different ways of flowing traffic, people slow down naturally because they're not quite sure who has right of way. I think you have to give information that's appropriate to her age and her level of maturity, and I think you have to say sometimes people will try and get you to do things that you don't want to do, and I think you have to have that sort of conversation. I think it's very difficult, though, you know, and I'd probably want to say don't wear them. The bigger thing, which is actually the rate of family breakdown in Holland is lower than here, and I think that's, you've hit on the nerve here, which is that actually children need to be taught about this, but in a way that's within a protective family environment, and that's something we're not very good at doing, because parents of my age are embarrassed. They don't know what they're talking about, and they don't want to address it. Actually, there is this sort of opinion that is changing, and I think that you've just got to support her in that decision and say, actually, this is a really positive decision you're making. Also, she's been unduly influenced, so I don't think, you know, you can say that this has been made as a rational decision. I personally, if I was the judge, would have banned her from seeing her. But you know, at the end of the day, and I feel very strongly about this, this is child abuse. These children are hideously overweight, they will get medical problems, they will get heart disease, shortness of breath, varicose veins, diabetes, you name it, and they will die early because of the amount of weight they're carrying. And we know that kids as young as 13 get fatty streaks in their arteries, so something's got to be done, unless you're going to say to these kids, you know, we're just going to let your parents carry on in the way they are. They need serious intervention, but I'm very nervous when you take kids away from their parents. And I think it's very difficult for women who have go to university, want to get to the top of their careers, they work hard to get there, and of course then having children you need to do it at a certain period of time, and that's the time when you're actually most likely to gain in your workplace. And I think women then leave it and leave it and leave it and think, well, I'll do it later and later, and then of course suddenly you wake up one day and you're 40, and then you have to go through the, I know, I've just had it, it's hideous, and you know, and you go through that whole thing of actually realising your fertility isn't what it was, that you have to have IVF. And my friends who don't have children, whether it was their own decision or whether they can't, also feel they're vilified. Quotes from the Bible, the greatest gift God gave was love, therefore celebrating love, and therefore a union, as we were saying earlier, has to be a good thing, because at least there's then stability. This is an issue for the Church of England, and it's a heck of an issue, because I do think it's going to split the church. And I also was very shocked. I read some of the most unchristian comments from members of the Church of England about this, and I find that extremely difficult to square, because the whole point is that you're meant to embrace each other, and you know, that is the fundamental teaching. So I think that's absolutely right, and it will depend where you sit on this. I mean, obviously the bishop, was he a bishop who married them? He obviously feels this sits within the church's doctrine. I understand your passion, Simon, but I think there's a really fundamental problem here, which is, I agree with both of you, which is that I think there should be one rule for all. And the whole point of religious tolerance should be that there is equality across all religions. And I think there is a real issue here. I think there's an issue also with the previous rulings from the law lords, I think 25 years ago, allowing certain people to wear I believe, turbans in schools and so on. So there seems to be incredibly muddy waters, isn't it? You know, grief is a really important process that you go through, and there are lots of phases of grief, you know, which start sort of with shock and denial and anger and so on, and then you kind of work through to acceptance. You never forget, and I think the interesting thing is how old you are at the time that it happens and how close you are and things like that, but you don't ever forget. You learn to live with it. People always say, well, there's no smoke without fire. If you're then on that database, I imagine, and I'm speculating, that people would then think, well, maybe there is something behind this. And I feel, you know, it just smacks yet again of a police state. And whilst I think the police need to be empowered, I think we need to be very careful about the technology and actually all the freedoms that we fought and people before us have fought so hard to have. I think it's a very serious subject, actually, and we as doctors do see a lot of people coming in who have got sexual problems, and a lot of it's about confidence. And I think there's a lot to be said for actually talking through some of the issues and so on and talking it, but I really like the idea of doing that one-to-one with someone that you can trust, that you don't, that you can really impart any information. I think this would be slightly bizarre to be in a classroom surrounded by a flogger and cucumbers. Personally, I think it's how you use it, isn't it? So, you know, we know there are 6,000 hospital admissions every year because of dogs. We also know that that does not include those people who go to A&E and so on. So there is a problem, and the Act was brought in, I think, in 91, wasn't it, and then revised again in 97. So that's one thing. What surprises me about this is that if you believe that a dog is a dangerous dog, then clearly that falls under the remit of the law. What doesn't seem right to me is that this dog was chipped, was licensed, and so therefore must have been seen by a vet. Well, again, with men, you know, I think they may be nervous. I think particularly if it's on a new date or you're out and you're trying to, you know, pull someone in a bar, then you're obviously going to be having a few drinks as well. It gives you Dutch courage. You're more likely to say hilarious things to try and impress them. And of course, there is a very fine line between how much you can have before, you know, as you say, your performance is severely impeded. You mentioned cutting the apron strings. You know, I'm not exactly in the first flush of youth, and I think it's as you get older.
Difficult to tell, though, David. From
bless you. Well, it's all the surgery, obviously.